So this month, by way of update, I thought I'd do a kind of criminologist on walkabout. I also thought I'd concentrate, by way of update, on the work of Stan Cohen, a book called Folk Devils and Moral Panics. This is something that has become so badly used in the politicking that's going on. Well, it's not politicking that's going on, really, is it? In the harassment and bullying of those of us with gender-critical beliefs. So, with that in mind, what he was most interested in were a series of scuffles that took place in 1964 between what was then called the Mods and the Rockers. Now, 64 was the year I was born, so we're talking a little while ago. And what Cohen was interested in wasn't actually the scuffles, to be perfectly frank. They were just two youth subcultures, and they were just scuffles at three seaside towns that early spring and summer. But what he was interested in was the media reporting of it, and what effect the media reporting had on it. So the scuffles got reported as riots. Of course, riots is a very emotive word. Once these scuffles at the Easter bank holiday got reported as riots, then of course you had the media preempting what might happen at the next bank holiday. Not just the media, police, a number of other individuals that Cohen went on eventually to call moral entrepreneurs. They started preempting what might happen at the next bank holiday. So it was like, oh my goodness, this lawless youth who wrecked these three towns over Easter, they might come back and riot and wreck the towns over the next bank holiday. And then once that media story, if you like, caught hold, and once those moral entrepreneurs started defining the Mods and Rockers as what Stan would eventually call folk devils. So these are people who are somehow beyond the pale, easily stereotyped, and are seen as being a threat to society of one variety or another. So you get the moral entrepreneurs saying something must be done about this. You've got groups of people who are easily identifiable. Then by the time you get to the next bank holiday, you have the police watching out for it and the media watching out for it. And of course, what happens? You get more scuffles and more arrests and more reporting. So at heart, when he's talking about folk devils and moral panics, one of the things that Cohen was trying to do was identify something that we in criminology call the deviancy amplification spiral, which is just really a big way of saying that the reporting of particular types of crimes, if you like, or disorders, can end up producing them. It can end up amplifying the problem, making it bigger and worse.
Okay, so watching back over the videos, I thought maybe I need to introduce just a little bit more about the subject matter of folk devils and moral panics. The point of folk devils and moral panics was not to say that this, that, or the other group are deviant or are criminal or are a problem. Rather, it was just looking at how these things become socially constructed, i.e., how they come real, if you like, in the process of it being reported and people asking for something to be done about it. So I've got a little image next to me right now to give you a sense of what that original analysis around deviancy amplification spirals was all about.
Okay, so the misapplication of folk devils and moral panics. The moral panic being that sense, oh my goodness, something's happening that's going to wreck society, we must do something about it. Then we create the very problem that we're trying to solve. But the misapplication of folk devils and moral panics is particularly in relation to gender critical views and what we are being accused of, is that we are just summoning up a folk devil, that we're having a moral panic about, sexual predators, and that we're stereotyping transgender people, particularly male-bodied people who identify as women. Now, there's a problem here, because what Stan Cohen said in his book wasn't there's no problem out there. What he was talking about was the reaction to a problem, and how that then kind of further cements it. So often the misuse of folk devils and moral panics, that we're creating a moral panic and a folk devil, is that there is no real problem. Well, that's both bad sociology, and it's a bad interpretation of folk devils and moral panics. What Stan Cohen was talking about were control waves, not crime waves, but what are the sort of things that activate the, for lack of better words, agents of the state. So, and also the media, the moral entrepreneurs, the police, the politicians, the leaders of thought. What sort of thing activates them to bring in more systems of control? Actually, Stan Cohen's theory about control waves, not crime waves, about moral entrepreneurs triggering off these control waves, can actually be used very well to understand what's happened to people like Maya Forstater, Denise Fahmy, me, and any of the other, well, and absolutely 100% Kathleen Stock, and Julie Bindel, and any of us who've stood up. It's a very useful analytical tool for understanding that notion. I mean, we use it, I suppose, in some of the common everyday language that gender critical people talk about. We talk about a witch hunt. Well, you know, if you think about it, that's not far different from what Cohen was talking about. So let me break that down for you a little bit. To create a folk devil, you need stereotypes. You present the, if you like, atypical against a background that's over-typical. And stereotypes are very helpful there. So the creation of a folk devil requires condensing the subtlety and nuance of a position into something very simple. Let's think about that word that I loathe, turf. Right? Now, in my mind, that is a slur, because not, you know, the whole question of exclusion or inclusion, but because the way in which it's used. It's used to present largely lesbians, it has to be said, but other second-wave feminists as somehow beyond the pale and doing damage and harming any progressive social movement. We're seen as retrogressive. Right? The fact that a stereotype exists isn't the problem, although how those are used becomes a problem. Now, in this case, what I'd say to you is that this stereotype of a TERF, this retrograde, transphobic individual, has been used by a particular set of moral entrepreneurs. These moral entrepreneurs are basically the people in an organization or a community who other people look to set the tone, if you like, to set the line between good and bad, because, you know, the line between good and bad, deviance and non-deviance, rule-breaking and not rule-breaking, that line shifts according to time, place, and context. So we have, you know, everyone knows about EDI and the role that that's played in universities. But we also have academics, we have students, and certainly in the case of the OU, you know, people from just about every part of that organization who signed that open letter against the Open University's Gender Critical Research Network. Now, at that moment, they are acting as moral entrepreneurs. They're basically saying this that has happened is beyond the pale. You know, and the words that we get are harm, transphobic, lack of safety, not inclusion. And off the back of that, they make a call to action. And then, of course, as we know from Stan Cohen, those sorts of cries for something to be done often end up reinforcing the controlling mechanisms rather than actually dealing with the problem that sits underneath there. And, you know, what happened? What happened in all of the cases of gender critical people is that the grievance processes within the organizations are brought to bear. Now, a grievance process is a control mechanism. I'm not going to go on too much further. I think you've kind of got the idea here. Folk devils and moral panics has nothing to do with bathrooms, and it has nothing to do with stereotypes. And, you know, I do not agree that all transgender people are sexual predators. They aren't. But there are sexual predators who will also be transgender. It's a simple fact. You know, we've got evidence from the prisons. We don't know why, we don't know what the relationship is, but, you know, we can't deny that fact, that some sexual predators may also be transgender. But the point, like I say, isn't about bathrooms. It never was about bathrooms, right? The point, if we're going to use a folk devils and moral panics analysis on what's happening at the moment, is how a group of women, largely, lesbians largely, who have voiced legitimate concerns about the balancing of sex-based rights in organizations, about the protection of women-only spaces, has been turned into a folk devil. Now, that's not just a stereotype, that's a stereotype who threatens social order. And the social order we are threatening is the idea that we're making progress on all of these fronts in terms of equality, and that we are threatening a vulnerable group in society, that being people who identify as trans. And because we are doing that, people in organizations need to do something. They need to write letters, they need to have petitions, they need to make statements, they need to make complaints to their HR. I mean, we've seen it all. Maya's case is a perfect example. Denise Fahmy's a perfect example. I'd like to say mine's a perfect example. And I hope whatever you're doing this weekend is fun and wonderful.